And welcome back, everybody, to another edition of Benched with Bubba, episode 59. Going to talk some fantasy baseball tonight and regular baseball because that's what we do. And tonight I will be joined by Justin Mason. You can find him on Twitter at Justin Mason FWFB. He's got work everywhere. Friends with Fantasy Benefits, Fangraphs, the Sleeper and the Bust Pod, Fantasy Alarm, FNTSY Radio. He does it all. So, Justin, how we doing?
Doing fantastically. Got out of the DMV unscathed this morning, so that was okay. I'm missing baseball. Football's great. Love me some football, but baseball is I think my favorite sport to play fantasy in, and so I feel like I'm missing out on a lot of uh, the challenge of fantasy baseball.
I'm with you. It's fun. First off, thanks for joining me. Thanks for inviting me to the Barf League. That's been a blast. Football's been fun, but I'm with you. I'm ready for baseball, so it couldn't come soon enough. Last year, I started recording preview stuff in like February. I was on a flight last week and I already made a list of stuff I want to do like every week from now on in baseball. It's go time.
Yeah, I
But
know that feeling. I'm already like prepping my preseason stuff right now, and it's insane just how quick the turnaround is. But at the same time, we miss it while it's gone.
Oh, definitely. It was just a few weeks ago. But before we get into kind of next season, let's talk a little bit of last year. I mentioned all the places people can find you, and also in doing so, you're in tons of drafts, industry drafts, all kinds of different fantasy baseball aspects. How'd you fare last year? Because I know there was one league you did very well in that I've heard a ton about.
Oh, that would be the Barf League, I'm sure you're referring to. One of the multiple leagues I won last year. I drafted 14 leagues, but I only played 13 out. I drafted for Stefania Bell in the Tout Wars head-to-head league, and I think she did fairly well. I won 3 leagues, I believe, and then I cashed in 3 or 4 others out of the 13. So I did pretty well. I mean, I definitely had some disappointments. There were some leagues in which I was near or pretty close to the bottom, but I paid off more than I put out. So that's always a successful season for me.
Oh, most definitely, big time successful season. Yeah, that I remember hearing your story about the drafting for Stefania Bell. That's one of those things when you start out doing fantasy work. That's one of the things you're looking forward to someday. So, are you going to be heading back to New York this year?
Definitely, and hopefully I'll have my own team to go draft this year after doing a pretty good job for Stefania last season. It is an amazing experience, and I recommend those people in the industry, even if you're not quote unquote invited, just show up. You know, it's a great place to meet people and network. It was one of the funnest experiences I've ever had, and I am super excited to have my own team and draft in my own style as opposed to having to draft for someone else.
Yeah, no doubt about it. It's always tricky having other people's strategies in play and trying to correlate yours with someone else and making it work. Speaking of strategies, you said you're over 50% success rate last year, which is outstanding. Um, what were like the main strategies you think that really worked out well for you, or just kind of you played the wire so well with all the madness and that's what took place?
I'm not a big tinker in season. I mean, obviously, I pick up guys when guys get hurt, or if I really, fall out of love with a guy, um, I, drop them for someone else, or if I see someone starting to emerge, maybe I grab them. But for the most part, I stick with a lot of what I draft. And I mean, so I have to put in a ton of draft prep. And like I mentioned before, I've already started prepping for the 2018 season. And I started back in September to prep for the 2018 season with the 2 early mocks that you were a part of, and a number of other people in the industry were a part of. One of the things I think I did really well this year was I navigated a lot of the landmines that in pitching, especially. I didn't invest extremely high in some of the aces that went down or struggled. And I think what I did this year was instead of falling into some of the hype, which a lot of people do on up and coming players or people that are perceived as breakouts, I stayed true to my values, and I took the deals where I could get them. And I think that's the thing we tend to forget in the industry is in this day and age, there's really no more anything called a sleeper. Like, there's so much information out there. People are on all of these guys that are quote unquote sleepers. We saw it with guys like James Paxton, who had a fantastic year, but by the time we got to draft day in most leagues, James Paxton's price was pretty high, and people are still calling him sleeper. And so I took a lot more deals on older guys, maybe that seemed like they were towards the end of their careers, Nelson Cruz, Edwin Encarnacion, while other people kind of jumped on maybe some, supposed breakouts that didn't pan out. And that, I think, attributed to a lot of my success.
So it sounds like we have similar strategies in season-wise, especially because I'm not a big tinker either, unless, like you said, the guy's hurt or he just completely doesn't have it. One of these years, I'm Nelson Cruz, for instance. One year he's just going to finally hit that wall, the age wall, and then you're going to have to make that decision. So I like that philosophy. You mentioned the pitchers. Are you one that will take a pitcher early, or are you on the mindset of quote unquote more old school guys where we're not touching pitching for a while?
For me, it's all about values. So, I mean, in the Barf League, for instance, 12-team league, I had the fifth or sixth, I think I had the fourth or fifth pick, and ended up with Paul Goldschmidt in the first round. And by the time it got to me in the second round, Max Scherzer was still on the board. Now, I hadn't intended for a guy like Scherzer to still be there, but if you remember back in, February and in March, he was dealing with this issue with his knuckle, where people were saying, well, he's going to have to grip the ball differently. How effective can he be? Is he going to have to go on the DL? And that really scared people off. So I pulled the trigger on him in the second round because the value itself just presented to be too good to pass up. And that turned out to be a really, really, great decision because he really anchored my pitching staff. So for me, it's I see it, we'll talk a little bit later about, kind of our top 5 pitching guys. But for me, I think I'm totally great with the top 4. If I land one of the top 4 pitchers, I'm going to be pretty stoked if I can do it in the late first, early second rounds. But then if I don't, I think I'm going to wait a while because I just think there's a lot less value and safety maybe in that second tier.
Yeah, and you're seeing it more and more these days with, I guess pitching philosophy is the word, where they're only going, 100 pitches for a lot of guys if you're not an ace. So they're almost all kind of evening out, as you're saying. We can do this next part kind of quick if you want. What were a couple of the players that throughout your draft prep you were very high on that let you down? And then what were a couple that, turned out to be really, really good for you that you targeted?
Well, this was an interesting question. Luckily for me, because I'm in so many leagues, I do an article every year called my full disclosure article. It's after my last draft of the year. I'll put together a list of how many times I took each player and just post it as is, little commentary here and there. But I've actually got the list in front of me, so that helps. So Kevin Gausman obviously was a huge disappointment for me. Miguel Cabrera, another guy that just kind of fell off the map because of the back injury. Todd Frazier, I had way too many shares of Todd Frazier. And then Adam Ottavino, I really thought he'd win that closer job out of spring training over Greg Holland, especially considering Holland's contract. But Holland was great, and Ottavino was rarely heard from again.
Let's just go straight to 2018. Let's get into it because I've been biting my tongue on enough things as you keep talking. We'll talk a couple kind of the young guys because if people haven't listened to Justin's stuff for some reason that you're listening to mine, I don't know why. They've been doing a lot of prospect talk. People listen to mine know I love prospects. So go listen to that. But let's talk Erin Judge, who was a prospect coming into last season, and everyone knows what he did. He just had surgery on his shoulders that apparently has been around for most of the season. So God can only imagine what he would have done with 2 healthy shoulders. What's your outlook? How early would you go with Judge in 2018?
Man, that's hard for me because I love Judge, and I think, I mean, obviously I had a number of shares of him because he was just going so cheap. He was worth a shot, and obviously paid off huge. Um, but I think he's getting a bit overdrafted this year. In my 2 early mocks, he was going around the 23rd pick overall, which to me, it just it pretty much means he's going to need to repeat at least 90% of what he did, and I just don't know if that's possible. He seems like he was a bit exposed during kind of the second half, parts of the second half of the season, though he did rebound right at the end and then has struggled in the playoffs. Um, you know, I think in OBP leagues, he's a guy that I would probably target more often than I would in average leagues. But I just think the floor is so low that taking him in the top 20 to 25 seems like a risk I'm not willing to take.
Yeah, and I'm with you there. It reminds me of like a Giancarlo Stanton thing, and I know everyone's made that comparison between the two. But when we used to talk Stanton, it was, can he stay healthy? Well, we finally saw what happens when he stays healthy. But at the same time, when you're so home run dependent, and we know how quote unquote easy it is to get 20 to 25 home runs now throughout the layers, do you want to go heavy there? Because the next guy I want to talk about, and in your 2 early mocks, he was 26th overall instead of 23rd, like Judge. But I'm talking Cody Bellinger, the NL Rookie of the Year. I'd rather have Bellinger if I'm going to go early because he gives you the steals, hopefully a more consistent average. I don't think the homers will be as prominent, but they still could be there. What are your thoughts on Bellinger and Bellinger compared to Judge?
I think I'd rather have Bellinger, one, because of the multi-position eligibility. He should be first base and outfield in most leagues. I like the team around him a bit more with the Dodgers. The park's not great, but I don't think he's one of those guys that is going to suffer too much from from playing in Dodger Stadium. And I think ultimately, I think the price is going to be lower. I just got him in the 3rd round of a 15-team mock that I'm doing through Lenny Melnick's website. A bunch of his writers and then people in the industry as well. And I was able to get him kind of on the wraparound in the beginning of the 3rd. And that to me feels like a pretty nice value. And I think the postseason woes that he went through, and then some of the drop off with strikeouts, I think people are going to cool on him a little bit more, and you may be able to get him in the 30 to 35 range, which I think is nice value. Whereas Judge, I don't think because of the New York tag, being a Yankee and what he did, I think he's going to continue to stay sky high. I saw him go in the 1st round of a really early NFBC league. That to me just seems insane. So I don't know if that'll own either of these guys because there's so many guys that I really like in the JD Martinez and T Gordon and George Springer, Gary Sanchez kind of tier there at the end of the 2nd round, early 3rd, that I think I will probably go a different direction, but I can guarantee you if I do own one of these guys, it's going to be Bellinger.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I know I took Cody in your 2 early to mocks, and I took him in another one we're both doing right now. And I'm really high on him, but when I look at the names around him here, I kind of wonder what I was thinking at times because my earlier picks, I like a little more stability and consistency. That's just me, but everyone's different, and we've only seen Cody do it once, so there's a lot to be said there. Now let's talk about a guy that we haven't seen at all in the U.S. except for maybe the World Baseball Classic if you want to go to that angle. But he's on everybody's radar. Everyone's talking about him. Shohei Itani. The kid is, he's still a kid technically. He's very, very good. We know he pitches, he hits. He's the Babe Ruth of Japan. Now, he wasn't in the 2 early mocks because the system didn't have him yet. Where are you seeing him go right now, or where would you imagine he goes right now?
Well, it's going to be interesting because he is going to have different eligibility depending on what site you play on. And so I think there's like 4 different options, and only one site that I know of is catering, allowing you to pick which option to go with. And I think that it's called On Roto. They're going to let you choose between all the options. But NFBC he's going to be pitcher only. That's it. He's just going to be a pitcher. In CBS, there's going to be a hitter version and a pitcher version, which I find interesting. And then Fantrax, he is going to start off as a pitcher, but as soon as he gains eligibility at a position, he will be a hitter and a pitcher that you can toggle between. As far as the other major sites like ESPN, Yahoo, I haven't heard yet where what they're going to do. If he is like a pitcher only in NFBC, I think you're going to see him going as like a top 15 pitcher, which I don't think is unreasonable considering what he's been able to do in Japan and the limited video, and it is very limited video that I've watched of him. He looks like he could be easily a top 10 starter at some point in his career in the major leagues. If you're in a league like Fantrax where you can kind of toggle between, especially if you're in a daily moves league as opposed to a weekly moves league, where you have to kind of determine, he's going to be a pitcher this week or a hitter this week. I think he is legitimately in the conversation as a top 15 to 20 pick. Because if you can get all of his pitching stats and then add in 20 plus home runs, that gives you so much value that I think he should be going that high. So it's going to depend a lot on what system you're playing on, what format you're playing on. But for me, if you're getting both stats, he's a top 20 guy. If you're only getting one, you're only getting his pitching stats, I'm going to put him inside my top 20 at starting pitcher. But that'll probably put him, around 50 to 60 overall.
Yeah, I had Ralph Lifshitz on from Rasball, and he was kind of saying similar things. Pitching wise, the stuff that he's seen, this guy could be top 10, top 15 guy, no problem. It's just a matter of how he gets used. We know the Twins are high on him, which is not too surprising the way their offseason talks are going. The Mariners love him. I only had heard the CBS version of that, and I know you have some interesting thoughts on this. So I've given my opinion many times of how I think if they're going to do it, he needs to be both. And the 2-player idea, because it's too complicated. But I saw a few different tweets you had about what you think his eligibility should be. If you had to pick one option, which one do you want?
I want what Fantrax is. I mean, obviously, I would love to have what On Roto is doing, because I think the ability for each league to say, okay, this is what we want someone like him to be, is freeing. Personally, I would prefer, if I was just given an option of one, I'd prefer what Fantrax is doing, the ability to toggle a guy between, hitting or pitching, depending on what he's doing that day. I play in mostly daily leagues anyways. I think Tout Wars is the only weekly league I play in, unless maybe one of the new ones I'm joining this year is a weekly. So for me, I think he should. I mean, he's one guy, and ultimately, I know people are like, well, this is fantasy, this isn't real life, we're not trying to mimic real life, and that's kind of BS. Of course you are. We're using real life stats, we're using real life players for a fun game, and it should mirror real life. And the idea that CBS is doing 2 cards, you can, I'm in a dynasty league, I've got the second pick, and I know the guy's going to take pitcher Itani first overall. Well, now I've got to decide between a top prospect and hitting Itani. It's ridiculous. He should be getting, both sets of stats. It's one guy producing them. So for me, I love what Fantrax is doing. I don't play in a ton of Fantrax leagues, but I play in a few, so that I'll be at least able to kind of enjoy it that way.
And that's interesting that they're letting you toggle daily on, like, you don't have to pick if, like, okay, he's a 2-star pitcher this week, he's a pitcher on, like, daily toggling. That takes it to a whole other level. Like you said, he could be a really high pick at that.
And he should be, yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I agree with what you're saying. It's just I haven't seen many of the bigger sites come out and give options like that. So that and Fantrax is growing. There's no disrespect to Fantrax, it's just they're just new to the scene.
Mm-hmm.
So totally get with that. The last thing on Otani, and this is not really a fantasy aspect, I just want your opinion because I think it's funny but smart at the same time. He sent out basically a questionnaire to every team. Basically, it's like check yes or no when you're in third grade. What are your thoughts on this approach from Otani? Because, these teams should be recruiting him, and he's basically coming right up front and saying, hey, you let me know why you want me. I don't even want to bother with the rest of it.
Well, I haven't seen much about this except for just the headline. I haven't had a chance to actually go read it. Do they have the actual questionnaire online too?
Probably. I haven't seen the full questionnaire. I've only read a couple brief blurbs. I haven't gone super deep. I just find it very entertaining that someone's taking this angle for once.
I think it's smart because, at the end of the day, the difference between what, Team A can offer and what Team B can offer, because he's subject to these these international bonus pools, because he wants to come now. I think if he waited till next year, he could just be a free agent and sign a massive deal. But now he's got to be subject to these bonus pools by coming this upcoming season. The difference between the Yankees and the Twins or whoever is just a few $100,000, and for him, he's already made a ton of money in Japan. If he cared that much about the money, ultimately he'd stay another year in Japan and then come next year when he could sign a massive deal. For him, this is about proving to the world, himself, whoever, that he is an elite player in any league, especially Major League Baseball. So I think it's kind of smart that he did it, because ultimately he just wants to be in the best situation where he feels he can show off his talents, and he wants teams to say, hey, listen, I'm willing to do this to bring you. I'm willing to let you hit 2 days a week and pitch every 5 days or every 6 days, because I know in Japan they pitch every 6 days as opposed to every 5. And so it maybe comes off as a little bit like sending a girl a note in kindergarten on whether they want to be your boyfriend or your girlfriend, and check yes or no. But I think it's kind of smart that he's, he can now go through and be like, okay, well, this team doesn't, jive with what I want to do. This team doesn't jive with what I want to do. And I think the Twins are going to be like, we'll let you do whatever you want if you just come to Minnesota.
Yeah, I've never been fortunate enough to have 30-plus women trying to come get me, so I've never had to put a questionnaire out there. But
I don't believe that for a second.
It just makes it easier for him because he wants to play both. And, there are teams out there going to say, no, we're putting money into you. You're not doing it. Well, he can just throw that to the burn pile, basically, and go from there. So it is good. It's just very interesting, and I think it's something we might see more often, which is pretty cool. Let's talk about another guy that I know many people cannot wait to see make his appearance this year in the bigs. When, we're not 100% sure, but I think it's sooner than later. But I've also heard reports recently it might not happen until the end of the year. We're talking the AFL MVP, Ronald Lacunae of the Braves, who somehow stuck it out through all the players getting kicked out of the system here recently. What's your thoughts on Acuna coming into 18? Does he make an impact, or is it kind of we wait and see? What are you thinking?
I think he makes an impact, but I've had this discussion with a lot of guys who knew more about prospects than me. Matt Thompson from Friends of Fantasy Benefits, my site, as an example. We talked a lot about him in our previous episode. And Ralph Lifshitz, like you mentioned, and they're all of the belief that they think Acuna is going to be up before the end of April, and I just don't see why the Braves would do that. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Why are you going to start a clock on a guy who is going to be 20 years old, at the beginning of the season? I think there is a chance that if he just continues to hit the cover off the ball in AAA, that they bring up, around Memorial Day. But other than that, I think there's a real legitimate shot that he's not up till July or later. And do you want to be investing a top 150 pick in a guy that may not be up till, Memorial Day, July, or even September? the Braves, I think they're going to be better than maybe other people do this year, but I don't think they're going to be great by any stretch of the imagination. And unless they get out to a really, really fast start, I don't think they're bringing this kid up.
Yeah, and that's there's like two philosophies, like I said, and you're in the one camp, and then you have the Ralphs and others that think Matt. Even I've heard his stuff. They think he's gonna be there early, and I'm hoping he's there early. I want to, as just a fan, I want to see the kid play. But fantasy wise, people are comparing him as highly as Mike Trout Lite, which is insane. If he's even close to that, he's going to be great and return tons of fantasy value. But I agree with what you're saying. It's a team like the Braves who they're rebuilding, and the rebuild took a snag now, but they're not going to be there at the end of this year. They still have another year or two to go. They're going to be better. I completely agree with that. I thought they were going to almost be 500 last year. They stumbled. I think they're like a 500 caliber team. They're getting closer. It's getting there. They need to make a few more changes. But, why start that clock that early unless he's just literally hitting like 700 and it's slow pitch softball in AAA? That's the only thing I can think of, but that's hard to believe. It'll be really interesting to see how that pans out, especially draft-wise. That's one thing I'm really curious about. You mentioned earlier top 5 starting pitchers, and I wanted to bring this up instead of just like an individual player thing because it's really changed a lot this last year. It used to be pretty clear. It was like Kershaw, then Scherzer, like a 1C, not even 1B, 1C. Then you had everybody else. And this last year, a lot of things changed between injuries and just some production. Who are your top 5? And I'll give my top 5 coming into 18.
Well, I think the top 4 is pretty easy. It just depends on what order you're putting him in. I got Max Scherzer, 1, Kershaw 2, Sale 3, Kluber 4, and I think you could flip-flop Kluber and Sale depending on just your preference personally. Then 5 becomes interesting because I think a lot of people are putting Bumgarner, Strasburg, Syndergaard kind of in that 5th spot. I'm going to go off the board away from those guys and go for Luis Severino. I really believe in what he did last year. I was big on him coming into the year. He was one of my sleeper guys, and he paid off pretty huge. I think he is 100% legitimate, and I think he's going to be a top 5 starter this year.
Hot take central on a Monday afternoon. I love it, but I don't hate it. I love Severino. The guy is phenomenal, and he took a gigantic step forward. Like you said, there's really no reason he should step back. It's his team. It's his spot. He is the ace of the staff. My one, I go Scherzer, but then I'm a little different. I go Kluber, Sale, then Kershaw. I am terrified of the back. We've seen it with him now. It's been multiple years. Once you get one back problem and you're seeing a repeat like this, they can flare up way more often. And I can't afford to take a pick that early where I'm having already that issue. Like you mentioned, people let Scherzer go. That worked out perfect for you. So maybe I'll just be bullish on this, and I'll be the guy that never has Kershaw, and I'll be, even as a Giants fan, twice as pissed off when I see him pitch now because I won't own him in fantasy either. I know he's great. And I listened to you were on Paul Martin's podcast the other day, and you're talking about Kershaw. Even like in 15 starts or whatever, he's sub-2 ERA. That's still pretty good. I can't go there. But after that, like you said, it's kind of jambalaya, and it's kind of people's choice. I'm thinking Bumgarner bounces back, but I definitely need to dig more into the top 5, after top 4, I should say. You don't have any concern with Kershaw's back, huh?
I mean, there's concern, obviously, and I think it's a risk-reward proposition because if he does give you 150 to 170 innings, he's going to be, one of the top 2 to 3 pitchers, maybe even the top pitcher, because he's just so elite when he's in there. You just have to balance that risk by what's the chance that he's only going to give you 100 or 70 or 50 innings because his back flares up early. I don't know that I am going to end up with a lot of shares of Kershaw this year because I think there's always at least one person in a league that is going to take Kershaw in the top 5 to 6 picks. I won't be willing to do that. But if there's a chance that he falls to me at the end of the first round, it's going to be hard for me not to pull the trigger on him because he's just so elite when he's in there. I think the deeper a league you're in, the less likely you'd see me pulling the trigger on him. If you're in a 15-team or larger league, I think I'm probably staying away, and maybe I'll bump him down below a Sale or a Kluber. But in a 10 or a 12-team league, I think there's a legitimate argument, considering what's left on the waiver wire, that Kershaw should be the number one pitcher off the board.
That is very, very fair. What size league do you prefer?
I like deep leagues. I play in a number of AL only and NL only leagues. And if I'm playing in a mixed league, I definitely prefer 15 teams or larger. But ultimately, I think any size league kind of, as long as it's not too shallow. Like, I know people playing like 8-man leagues, and I'm like, oh man, just find some more friends. But for me, I prefer the deeper leagues, because I think it one puts more of an onus on knowing people on draft day, as opposed to being able to just cycle guys in and out through the waiver wire, and I think that kind of builds to my strengths. And two, I just think it becomes easier when you're not putting together all-star teams, or it's more difficult when you're not putting together all-star teams. So, but I think there is a kind of a charm to every size league, because as long as the people you're playing with is fun. That's why I like the Barf League in Tout Wars, because the people I play with in those leagues are really, really interesting, fun people.
Yeah, no doubt about that. I completely agree there. Let's talk about your 2 early mocks that you did, and 2 is because it was 2 early people. There was 4 drafts. Let me clarify this. Justin's done it now. I believe this is your 2nd year, right, Justin?
This is actually the 3rd year I've done this, but this is the first year where we've done. I think we did two of them last year. This is the first year we've done so many. We did 4. The first year we just did 1. I believe last year we did two of these. And this year we bumped it up to 4. And it seems like with the amount of people that are really enjoying it, next year there may be 6 to 8 of these things going at the same time.
Yeah, it was a blast. And like you said, you're doing other ones. I've got other ones going on. I never thought in all my time playing fantasy sports we'd be doing mock drafts this soon, but it's actually it's kind of copacetic to help get through the winter months as you go. Go through I'm going to link the article to our article and the podcast so people can get a quick reference to it. But he basically puts all the people in the drafts, where all the players went. You get like an ADP list, which is actually pretty darn cool to look at when you break it all down. I'm just going to go through here and say a couple guys' names, and I just want to get your thoughts on where they stood out. On average, Charlie Blackmon and Harper were both 6th overall. Do you really feel, I know Blackmon had a great year, would you really have Blackmon ahead of Harper?
That's a difficult question. I mean, I think he should be. Do I think that I would make that choice given the draft pick every time? No. And I think, if you're talking about an OBP league, I think I start leaning Harper. The thing about Harper is he's an upside play. He's one of those guys that you look at what he could potentially do and what he did do a few years ago, and you go, man, this guy can be something special. This could be better than Mike Trout this year. But you've also got to, temper the fact that he's only done it once. And there's been a lot of injuries, a lot of different kind of injuries along the way, because he's a guy that plays hard and tends to get banged up. I think it's actually the smarter move to go after Charlie Blackmon, because I think his production level is a little bit more stable. I think there's a much safer floor. But I understand why people are, continuing to draft Harper this high.
Yeah, most definitely. When you get down to technically 9th through 19th, there's 3 big-time first basemen. You have Joey Votto finished 2nd in the MVP voting. He was averaged 9th. But then you have guys like Rizzo, who was just a little below 17th overall, and Freddie Freeman around 20th overall. There's a lot of similarities to these guys. Would you be willing to go that high on Votto, or would you rather just wait for one of the guys down below?
I'm willing to go that high on Votto. I think Votto is a special player, and I think the Reds are, while the Reds aren't very good, I think the offense is getting better and better, and so I think the supporting cast will continue to improve. Uh, I think there are question marks on Rizzo a little bit. Uh, can he continue to uh, be return first or second round value year to year? And so Rizzo's not a guy that's going to end up on a number of my teams. Will the average be more like it was in 2017 or 2016? Because there's a 20-point swing there. Will he continue to steal bases like he did this last year, or will it go back to what it was last year? So I think there's some question marks at Rizzo. I think if he has second base eligibility, which he somehow
Yeah.
got in some leagues, obviously you bump him up. Um, you know, a lot of it depends too on what depth of league you're drafting in. Because in a 12-team league, and I've done a number of 12-team mocks, two for magazines that'll be coming out in the spring. I did one a couple weeks ago and another one tonight. In that shallow of a league, first base is really, really deep. There's a huge pool to pick from. When you play in a 15-team league, you may not think that the pool dries up that quickly, but it really does. And there's a huge drop-off that occurs. So in a 15-team league, I'm much more likely to pull the trigger on Votto early on and be okay with, filling out other positions later. Whereas in a 12-team league, I think I'm going to push Votto out of my first round and go for value because there are guys later that make a lot of sense.
No, and that's a very, very valid point. The size of your league, the scoring in your league, all those kind of things, it does make a big difference at certain positions. And every year when you dig into positions, there's new positions that are more scarce or surprisingly scarce, I should say, than they've been in the past and vice versa. When you look at, say, the top 10 or top 20, I'm not going to name them all off. You've obviously put this together. What's like a name or two that may not even be in this top 20 that you could see, taking a rise throughout the offseason? Maybe like the hype train finds them or something.
Let's see. Hype train. I think D Gordon was the 25th overall player coming off the board, and I think he deserves to be going higher. What he can do in the speed department and in the batting average department at a scarce position at second base. It's not as deep as I think some people may think it is. Really should be putting him closer to a first rounder than a third rounder. And so D Gordon's a guy that I would expect to see rise a little bit. And I would expect to see Gary Sanchez's numbers, even though people are like, wow, I can't believe he's going inside the top 30. If you're in a two-catcher format, what these mocks are for, the difference between him and just the rest of the field is amazing. In a two-catcher format, you need to draft good catchers. It doesn't necessarily need to be top tier, but you can't take a zero. You can't get a bottom barrel guys like you used to back in the late 90s or early 2000s. It just offers too much negative value drafting those lower end catchers. So Gary Sanchez is a guy that I think actually legitimately deserves to be drafted inside the top 20, and it's not.
There's a lot of questions I could ask you about this mock, but I want people to actually go read the article, and then they could talk about it later, because there are some intriguing players and so on and so forth that you might not see next to each other, or they're farther down, farther up, whatever spectrum. There's a lot of. It's really, really cool to check out the work you put in here from everybody else's picks and everything like that. So really good stuff. As we go into the 2018 season, you've already mentioned you're not a tinkerer, so you've already started doing your prep. You have to have a strategy in place. Are you going to change it up a lot based on what you saw in 2017, or are you going to kind of stay with your same approach?
I don't think I'm going to change it up too much. I'm always a kind of a best available talent kind of guy, and I'll figure, shortfalls either in categories or positions later on via trades or the waiver wire. But I think the one thing that I will maybe pull the trigger on a little bit more is on younger players. I didn't buy into some of the younger players. I wish I had Bellinger. I was a big detractor of of Adrian Gonzalez coming in the year, but for some reason had no shares of Cody Bellinger, which makes absolutely no sense because I kept saying that this Gonzalez was done, that this wasn't going to be a year in which he rebounds. But I didn't go out and invest in the prospect that was potentially going to take over his position. So, and I think for me that's a big thing. Maybe believe a little bit more in some of the younger talent. Uh, maybe not the Acunas that are a little bit high priced, but the Scott Kingerys of the world. Guys that could be up fairly soon, and have a big impact, but don't cost a whole lot. And then, yeah, I'm going to try my best to stay away from pitching that is high priced and injury prone. So, I talked about those tiers of guys, the Bumgarner, Strasburg, Syndergaard tier. I'm going to stay away from that where maybe I would have dipped my toe in the water in season past.
Now, if you don't have the answer to this in front of you, that's fine. We can skip it. But you mentioned you're going to skip that tier. Where does your next tier start in a roundabout way?
I think it is, the DeGrom, Severino, Carrasco tier that I'm kind of looking at. That's where I'm going to get my first starter if I didn't jump in on the first round. Or if for some reason, like, one of the things I've been saying is, a lot of people really want to draft towards the back end of the first round in a 15-team league because they feel like there's such a, deep level of elite talent that they're going to get, two top, players. I actually want to draft towards the top because I want to get, a Trout Altuve. And then I still think that pool is deep enough where I'm going to get three guys that would probably rank inside my top 20 with, my first three picks. The scary part about that becomes pitching typically has been going off the board fairly quickly in between that second and third round. So, there's a chance you could miss out if you don't pull the trigger on, one of those guys like Bumgarner, Strasburg, and Syndergaard. Robbie Ray is a guy I'm going to be targeting a lot. Zach Greinke is a guy I'm going to be targeting a lot. Carlos Martinez. I think those guys aren't looked at as aces, but they've put up ace-like numbers, and I think there's no reason not to believe in them.
And you just said it there. I was thinking when you just started listening to the Severinos, and you just mentioned those guys. These are a lot of number ones on their teams. There are a lot of potential top end guys that you wouldn't be shocked if they were a top 5 Cy Young candidate, and you're going to get them in the rounds 4, 5, 6, something like that. So that's huge. The last question on the outline. Throughout this talk, I had a couple more things pop up. You're a Giants fan, so we need to talk. We need to talk. I am all aboard this Giancarlo Stanton and D. Gordon deal. I know we're losing some big prospects, pretty much our only prospects outside of Helio Ramos. Pretty much all of them are going to be gone. But I'm 1,000% on board with this. What are your thoughts on the Stanton trade? Potential.
Well, the proposed trade that was offered is not going to happen. So, I think all Giants fans are like, sure, I'll give up, Tyler Beatty and Austin Ryder or whoever else was in that leaked offer. The Marlins aren't going to take that. They can get more than that. I think they have to give up Helio Ramos and probably Tyler Beatty and maybe another piece or two. But I'm all for it. Go ahead. I mean, the Giants are in a weird situation where they've got a very, very old team and they're stuck with some of these contracts for some of them for a while. And some of them come off the books, like Hunter Pence comes off the books after next year. Denard Span, they can buy out the remaining year of his deal after next year, and free up some more money that way. But they're old, and so you either take the road of, listen, we're going to start the rebuild now, and we're going to be really bad for the next couple of years, or you go, hey, we're going to be bad in the next couple of years anyways. Why not take one more shot at this? With a guy like Stanton, and we'll start the rebuild in 2 years and see what happens. I think that's what they should do. I think that's what they're going to try to do. I don't know that they have the firepower necessary to obtain Stanton and D. Gordon together. And in order to do that, they would have to free up some money by trading, maybe like a Brandon Belt or something like that, which I don't have a problem with. But then you've got another hole to go out and fill while you still have a hole at third base. Um, so I think the smart move would probably be to say, listen, we won our 3 championships. We did it at the expense of the future. The future is now. We're gonna suck for a couple years. Let's blow everything up that isn't Posey, Crawford and Bumgarner and rebuild. I don't think they're gonna do that, which I'm totally fine with as a fan. But it's probably not the smartest move.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And that first deal obviously won't go through because otherwise it would have already.
Mm-hmm.
But the part I'm really curious on and where the Giants can factor, especially if they can move someone, is how much money do the Marlins want from whatever team's coming into play? Because it's not all about prospects as we know it. Then they do want a good chunk of cash coming back. So it'd be really interesting.
I think that's the only reason the Giants are in this conversation.
Oh, no doubt about it.
If we were talking about strength of prospects being sent over, the Giants would be, towards the bottom of any negotiation. But I think the Giants are willing to go, we will take that entire contract. And that's very attractive for the Marlins.
Oh, big time. And if they can't get Stanton, I'm okay with JD Martinez. Just throwing that out there to anybody that wants to pass that memo along. Just go for that. A couple more questions. I already asked you what size leagues you prefer. A couple things that a lot of industry guys have talked about. Some have already made the change. Some are slowly changing. Do you prefer, and do you think most leagues will go to OBP leagues?
I'm ambivalent about that. I think that I enjoy playing in on-base percentage leagues. I enjoy playing in average leagues. I think there is an old guard within fantasy baseball that's been playing for, longer than a decade that really, just doesn't want to learn, the OBP strategies and things like that. And so that's why the change has come so slowly. But ultimately, I don't have a problem with either. I've played fantasy baseball for almost 20 years at this point, and most of it was average leagues. But I'm fine with either or. Just pick your rules and stick with them.
Okay, well, that probably will answer the next few questions, but a couple other topics, like saves or saves and holds leagues.
I don't really like saves plus holds leagues. I do play in a league or two where it's there, separate categories, saves, and then another category for holds. I kind of like that, especially with where Major League Baseball is going in terms of the amount of relievers being used in games. It's hard because the rules for getting a save and the rules for getting holds can somewhat be arbitrary at times, and so I understand why people want to do the save plus holds because one, it kind of deepens up the reliever pool. Um, but I also think it kind of maybe cheapens it by doing them both together. I think if you're gonna if you're gonna play with holds, or if you want to play with saves plus holds, I would say make it a 6x6 league. Get a category for holds and then a category for saves, and then add OBP and average as separate categories in the offense.
Okay, that's a very good point. Last thing I have for you here, mentioned we can find you everywhere. Now you're doing magazines that I don't even know about yet. You got stuff everywhere, and I love it because you're really good at what you do, and you're good for the industry. You talk to everybody. You've helped me out. You've helped many people out. What do you have store in 2018? Because each year you just get bigger and better. So what's your plans in 2018?
Oh man, so much going on, and I mean, I can't even announce all of it quite yet. But Friends of Fantasy Benefits is been taking off and doing really good work. We do baseball podcasts, got articles for all sports. Um, in For our prep, we do probably the most amount of podcasts prior to the start of the season than pretty much any other podcast out there. For the first month of the season, we do a podcast on each individual team, and then a separate mini pod, as we call it, though sometimes it can be almost as long as a regular pod, covering each farm system between me and Matt Thompson do those. And then we pretty much go 5 days a week from February until the start of the season, and then a couple times, anywhere from 2 to 4 times a week in season. And then we're talking about maybe doing a draft guide this year that would cover every single farm system, every single team, a bunch of strategies, things like that, for a fairly cheap price. But just something where we could just put all of our stuff together and sell it off in one big content, as opposed to just putting things out little by little on the site. Then I'm on the Tout Wards Hour on the Fantasy Sports Radio Network, 9 to 11 p.m. Eastern, with Laura Michaels. That's been a lot of fun, so definitely check that out. I write for Fantasy Alarm for football, but I don't know. There's a chance maybe if they or anybody else would like to hire me for baseball, I'm always looking forward to increasing my my bank account. So definitely have enjoyed that. And then Fangraphs, I write about 4 to 5 times a week in season. I do their daily notes, and then typically another article here and there that either focuses on strategy or fantasy ethics. I read a lot of fantasy ethics pieces over there. And then got kind of an interesting industry league in the works that I can't really talk too much about because I'm still kind of finalizing it, but it would probably be the largest industry league that baseball has ever seen. So I think that will be interesting if it comes all together.
Outstanding. And he also left out, he does this little podcast that's had a ton of episodes so far in his career with one Paul Sporer and Eno Saris. So
yeah, I'm the producer of Sleeper in the Bus. They rarely let me talk except for to say something snarky.
Oh no! When you pop in, it's always like if I'm kind of just. Most times I'll have a lot of podcasts just on in the background when I'm doing things. But whenever your voice comes up, I make a point to stop because someone made some comment that got everything going.
Well, and that's a fun part because I mean I've been listening to the Sleeper in the Bus podcast, God, since before Paul was on it. And I mean I credit Paul in Jason Collette for one of the reasons I even got into the industry, and Paul especially, and along with guys like Laura Michaels in the industry, have really helped me kind of get to where I'm at, and I credit them for a lot. But it's always funny because I mean, if you're anything like me, when you listen to a podcast, you're listening, but you also like comment either in your head or I do it aloud. When someone says something that you either really agree with or says something you really hate, and so it's really weird being in on Paul and Eno or Paul and Jason talking and them saying something, because I can't yell at them in the same way I would if I'm just listening to my phone, because that obviously would come over the airways, and they don't allow, or they're not supposed to swear, I think.
Yeah, that's so funny because one of the things my wife, she'll laugh at me for one of the many things she laughs at me about. But if we're driving somewhere, she'll read a book, so I'll put a podcast on and I'll start talking. She's like, "What are you doing?" I said, "Oh, don't worry about it. I'm just commenting. They can't hear me. It's okay." But all right, man. I appreciate you joining me. Everyone, check out Justin's work everywhere, but most importantly, and I imagine, friendswithfantasybenefits.com. That's his personal baby. So go check that out. Tons of great stuff. Give him a follow on Twitter and give all his guys a follow. He's got a handful of really good guys. He mentioned Matt Thompson. I know Darius is on there. There's a handful of really good content coming out there, and it's only to get bigger and better, as you can tell. So follow Justin on Twitter at Justin Mason FWFB, and check out the website, friendswithfantasybenefits.com. Justin, thanks for joining me, man.
Thank you for having me on. It was really, really fun.
I appreciate it. Everybody, this was Bench with Bubba, episode 59, talking fantasy baseball with Justin Mason. I'll catch you guys later.